Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week is Parashah 19, Terumah, meaning contribution, and we're starting in Exodus chapter 25, verse 2. I'll give everyone a chance to get turned. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel to take up a collection for me. Accept a contribution from anyone who wholeheartedly wants to give. The contribution you are to take from them is to consist of gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, and fine leather, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and other stones to be set for the ritual vest and breastplate. They are to make me a sanctuary so that I may live among them. You are to make it according to everything I show you, the design of the tabernacle and the design of its furnishings. This is how you are to make it. They are to make an ark of acacia wood, 3 3/4 feet long, 2 1/4 feet wide, and 2 1/4 feet high. You are to overlay it with pure gold, overlay it both inside and outside, and put a molding of gold around the top of it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and attach them to its 4 feet, 2 rings on each side. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark. You will use them to carry the ark. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark. They are not to be removed from it. Into the ark you are to put the testimony which I am about to give you. You are to make a cover for the ark out of pure gold. It is to be 3 3/4 feet long and 2 1/4 feet high. You are to make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work for the 2 ends of the ark cover. Make 1 cherub for one end and 1 cherub for the other end. Make the cherubim out of 1 piece with the ark cover at its 2 ends. The cherubim will have their wings spread out above so that their wings cover the ark and their faces are toward each other and toward the ark cover. You are to put the ark cover on top of the ark. Inside the ark you will put the testimony that I am about to give you. There I will meet with you. I will speak with you from above the ark cover, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark for the testimony, about all the orders I am giving you for the people of Israel. You are to make a table of acacia wood, 3 feet long, 18 inches wide, and 18 inches high. Overlay it with pure gold and put a molding of gold around the top of it. Make around it a rim a handbreadth wide and put a molding of gold around the rim. Make 4 gold rings for it and attach the rings to the 4 corners near its 4 legs. The rings to hold the poles used to carry the table are to be placed close to the rim. Make the poles of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and use them to carry the table. Make its dishes, pans, bowls, and pitchers of pure gold. On the table you are to place the bread of the presence in my presence always. You are to make a menorah of pure gold. It is to be made of hammered work. Its base, shafts, cups, ring of outer leaves, and petals are to be of 1 piece with it. It is to have 6 branches extending from its sides, 3 branches of the menorah on one side of it and 3 on the other. On 1 branch are to be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. Likewise, the opposite branch, 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. And similarly for all 6 branches extending from the menorah. On the central shaft of the menorah are to be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with its ring of outer leaves and petals. Where each pair of branches joins the central shaft is to be a ring of outer leaves of 1 piece with the pair of branches, thus for all 6 branches. The rings of outer leaves and their branches are to be of 1 piece with the shaft. Thus the whole menorah is to be a single piece of hammered work made of pure gold. Make 7 lamps for the menorah and mount them so as to give light to the space in front of it. Its tongs and trays are to be of pure gold. The menorah and its utensils are to be made of 66 pounds of pure gold. See that you make them according to the design being shown you on the mountain. You are to make the tabernacle with 10 sheets of finely woven linen and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. You are to make them with cherubim worked in, that have been crafted by a skilled artisan. Each one is to be 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. All the sheets are to be the same size. 5 sheets are to be joined one to another, and the other 5 sheets are to be joined to one another. Make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost sheet in the first set, and do the same on the edge of the outermost sheet in the second set. Make 50 loops on one sheet, and make 50 loops on the edge of the sheet in the second set. The loops are to be opposite one another. Make 50 fasteners of gold, and couple the sheets to each other with the fasteners, so that the tabernacle forms a single unit. You are to make sheets of goat's hair to be used as a tent, covering the tabernacle. Make 11 sheets. Each sheet is to be 45 feet long and 6 feet wide. All 11 sheets are to be the same size. Join 5 sheets together and 6 sheets together, and fold the 6th sheet double at the front of the tent. Make 50 loops on the edge of the outermost sheet in the first set, and 50 loops on the edge of the outermost sheet in the second set. Make 50 fasteners of bronze. Put the fasteners in the loops and join the tent together so that it forms a single unit. As for the overhanging part that remains of the sheets forming the tent, the half sheet remaining is to hang over the back of the tabernacle, and the 18 inches on the one side and the 18 inches on the other side of that remaining in the length of the sheets forming the tent is to hang over the tabernacle to cover it on each side. You are to make a covering for the tent of tanned ram skins and an outer covering of fine leather. Make the upright planks for the tabernacle out of acacia wood. Each plank is to be 15 feet long and 2¼ feet wide. There are to be 2 projections on each plank, and the planks are to be joined one to another. That is how you are to make all the planks for the tabernacle. Make the planks for the tabernacle as follows: 20 planks for the south side facing southward. Make 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 projections, and 2 sockets under another plank for its 2 projections. For the second side of the tabernacle to the north, make 20 planks, and their 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 under another. For the rear part of the tabernacle toward the west, make 6 planks. For the corners of the tabernacle in the rear, make 2 planks. These are to be double from the bottom all the way to the top, but joined at a single ring. Do the same with both of them. They are to form the 2 corners. Thus there will be 8 planks with their silver sockets, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 under another. Make crossbars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks on the one side of the tabernacle, 5 crossbars for the planks of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 crossbars for the planks at the side of the tabernacle at the rear toward the west. The middle crossbar, halfway up the planks, is to extend from end to end. Overlay the planks with gold, making gold rings for them, through which the crossbars will pass, and overlay the crossbars with gold. You are to erect the tabernacle according to the design you have been shown on the mountain. You are to make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. Make it with cherubim worked in that have been crafted by a skilled artisan. Hang it with gold hooks on 4 acacia wood posts, overlaid with gold and standing in 4 silver sockets. Hang the curtain below the fasteners. Then bring the ark for the testimony inside the curtain. The curtain will be a divider for you between the holy place and the especially holy place. You are to put the ark cover on the ark for the testimony in the especially holy place. You are to put the table outside the curtain and the menorah opposite the table on the side of the tabernacle toward the south. Put the table on the north side. For the entrance to the tent, make a screen of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. For the screen, make 5 posts of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and cast for them 5 sockets of bronze. You are to make the altar of acacia wood, 7½ feet long and 7½ feet wide. The altar is to be square and 4½ feet high. Make horns for it on its four corners. The horns are to be of one piece with it, and you are to overlay it with bronze. Make its pots for removing ashes, and its shovels, basins, meat hooks, and fire pans. All its utensils you are to make of bronze. Make for it a grate of bronze netting, and on the four corners of the netting make 4 bronze rings. Put it under the rim of the altar, so that the netting reaches halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar, and overlay them with bronze. Its poles are to be put into the rings. The poles are to be on both sides of the altar for carrying it. The altar is to be made of planks and hollow on the inside. They are to make it just as you were shown on the mountain. Here is how you are to make the courtyard of the tabernacle. On the south side, facing southward, are to be tapestries for the courtyard made of finely woven linen, 150 feet for one side, supported on 20 posts in 20 bronze sockets. The hooks on the posts and the attached rings for hanging are to be made of silver. Likewise, along the north side are to be tapestries, 150 feet long, hung on 20 posts in 20 bronze sockets with silver hooks and rings for the posts. Across the width of the courtyard on the west side are to be tapestries, 75 feet long, hung on 10 posts in 10 sockets. The width of the courtyard on the east side, facing east, will be 75 feet. The tapestries for one side of the gateway will be 22.5 feet long, hung on 3 posts in 3 sockets. For the other side, there will be tapestries 22.5 feet long on 3 posts in 3 sockets. For the gateway of the courtyard, there is to be a screen 30 feet made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. It is to be on 4 posts in 4 sockets. All the posts all the way around the courtyard are to be banded with silver and to stand in sockets of bronze. The length of the courtyard is to be 150 feet and the width 75 feet everywhere, with the height 7.5 feet. The tapestries and screen are to be of finely woven linen, and the sockets are to be of bronze. All the equipment needed for every kind of service in the tabernacle, as well as the tent pegs for the tabernacle and the courtyard, are to be of bronze. Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. This entire Torah portion concerns the exacting standards that the Israelites are to follow to build Yehovah a tent sanctuary. And this was not because Israel decided to do this, but rather because the Father commanded it. And because Israel, not God, needed it. Exodus 25:8 says, "They are to make me a sanctuary so that I might live among them." The Father wanted to be accessible to Israel. The reality is that almost all known cultures built temples for their gods to dwell in. And I have little doubt that is why Yehovah told Israel to build him a sanctuary. See, the thought of people in this era was, how else could a nation's gods be there for them, if not in a place where they could be accessed? Now, naturally, in reality, God doesn't need a sanctuary to be where his people are, nor a specific place to meet with them. But people of that era were certain that he did. And without a specific sanctuary, they would never feel secure. Now, what we learn is that God, in his great mercy, deals with each of us on the basis of our own culture and how we understand the world from our viewpoint. The hope is, of course, that our worldview might change to conform with how the Lord actually made things to operate. And as some time passes, the hope is our understanding of God increases. But especially at first, God will bend his will to accommodate people's assumptions and customs so that he can make himself known to them and then the process can begin. For God not to designate to Israel a sort of temple for him to reside in would have been confusing for the people. It would have made understanding who he was, how he could sufficiently prove that he was with them, and communicate his intent to meet with the leadership of Israel as needed, nearly impossible. Yet he asked only for a tent, not a temple. Why? Why only a tent? Well, because temples are permanent. They're fixed edifices, suitable only for a settled people. Israel would be nomads for the next 40 years, moving every several months to a new location, thus a portable temple, a tent. Well, that was actually the only practical answer. I mean, if God was going to be in their presence, they'd have to bring him along with them, just as all other peoples and nations did that. Well, when we read these 3 chapters, we see these exacting specifications for his sanctuary. And yet, we also see that much was left to the artistic creativity of various artisans to take concepts to something that could actually be detailed and made, which is what architects generally do. For instance, carvim, cherubim, were to be woven into the curtain. What did cherubim look like? After all, these are spiritual. They're not physical beings. Artists had to decide that before they could be depicted. Before the design of the tabernacle is revealed, we're first given the construction blueprint of several of the items of sacred furniture and sacrificial instruments. So, the instructions regarding the building of the temple begin, in essence, on the inside. Jehovah's instructions begin with the holiest of the items, the Ark of the Covenant, and then next move to the merely holy, the menorah, or the table of showbread, and then the altar of incense. And then finally move to the outside of the sanctuary tent and into the open air area that the regular Israelite might come and visit. That's the courtyard that is outside of the tent. There in the courtyard is where the sacrificial altar would be placed, but even this is built to be entirely portable. God tells Moses something curious. Moses is to collect the materials needed for the tabernacle from the Israelite people, the gold, the silver, the precious gems, some of the costly building materials, but only collected from those who are willing to give without being strong-armed or guilted into it. This is to be an offering, a contribution. Nothing is to be given for any other reason than the person wants to give it. There's no penalty, nor is there to be any peer pressure or guilt applied to the people of Israel to give. Moses is not encouraged to make some passionate plea to the people. The need is stated. Then, the giving either comes from the people's hearts and their consciences or not at all. However, the tabernacle is for the benefit of the entire community of Israel, not for God. And it is reasonably expected then that all will contribute to one level or another. See, I could easily turn this into a 30-minute lesson about giving or tithing. I'll resist that temptation. But the truth is, you all know what you're supposed to do. It's simply an issue of obedience to God. But it's also an issue of you picking up your fair share. Your fair share of the financial load of this ministry, or whatever ministry you normally attend, rather than just being a recipient of its benefits. Just as it was in Moses' era, there are unavoidable costs to do the business of ministry. And the God principle is that these costs should be shared by all. But let's also not mischaracterize about what giving, offering, actually is. It is not some kind of modern Gentile believers' replacement for the Levitical sacrificial system. You don't give to have your sins atoned for. But that is what the sacrificial system did. Sacrificing is sacrificing, giving is giving. They are entirely different in purpose and nature. As regards sin and its effects on people, Yeshua has already satisfied the requirements of the Torah's sacrificial system, once and for all. So our giving, our tithing cannot be classified as a sacrifice. Rather, the God principle about our modern day giving is set down for us right here in the first verse of Exodus 25. It is equivalent to the free will offering called Terumah in Hebrew. Free will means just that. It is given unto God. It is not taken from you. We either freely give for a common cause with a joyful heart, out of obedience and gratitude for what Yehovah has done for us, because we recognize the need and we recognize our duty to contribute, or we shouldn't do it at all. I want to be clear. Giving to your favorite secular charity is not about serving God. Many of them are no doubt worthy causes. They can be a good thing, but this is not a substitute or an acceptable alternative for giving to God. Giving to God means giving to those human organizations who are operating in His holy name for His holy purposes. That's what giving to the tabernacle and the priesthood was. And it is how it is in our day. Giving reluctantly, giving out of guilt, or from wanting something in return, like personal recognition, or God doing something for you personally as a reward. That's the wrong motivation. And it will bring upon you scorn from heaven, not blessings. I'm going to say it bluntly. The type of giving that every believer ought to do is not in the realm of sacrifice. It's a privilege, but it's also a duty. And it's an act of the conscience born out of a commandment of God. So is it a sin not to give to God? You bet it is. Of course it is. And, by the way, as one who claimed Christ, but who also ignored this reality for the first 35 or 40 years of my life, always finding rationalizations that sure seemed like good ones to me, I can testify that giving is the most satisfying, soul-comforting, and the most underappreciated part of our faith walk. See, one cannot sin against God knowing that you are and still have peace of mind. We can't sin or avoid our obligations and then say, now bless me, O God, as though I had been obedient to you. Enough said. Please note in these verses that the construction materials used for the tabernacle are grouped into 7 categories: dyed yarns, metals, fabrics, timber, oil, spices, and gemstones. That there were 7 categories is symbolic of being ideal and complete. Now, most interestingly, if not a bit startling, is that there is a very interesting reality about some of the fabrics that will be used in the tabernacle. Some of these fabrics consist of a mixture of wool and linen. That may not mean much to you now, but when we get to the Torah portions in Leviticus, you will better understand what I'm going to briefly explain to you now. In Hebrew, this mixing of 2 kinds can result in something called shatnez. And biblically, this is mixing 2 kinds of something together that God calls an illicit mixture. It's a prohibited mixing. A fabric mixture of wool and linen is usually prohibited. Clothing, for example, is generally not to be made of material of this kind of mixed fibers. Yet we'll find that the veil that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary, as well as the outer curtain at the entry from the courtyard into the tent sanctuary, even certain parts of the high priest's ritual clothing are required to be made of this same mixture. This shatnez, that in many situations is otherwise forbidden. So what's happening here? See, what we learn from this is that certain things are reserved for the most holy, as designated by God. Use outside that context is not allowed. Therefore, there is nothing inherently unholy or impure about mixed fabrics. It all has to do with what its use is. The weaving together of linen and wool does not create some kind of magical evil interaction such that the resulting fabric becomes altogether wicked or perverse. This understanding is the key to correctly comprehending the principles behind everything from kosher eating to the designation of clean versus unclean animals. It's a mistake to think that any food or animal has some type of inborn, organic, or systemic holiness, while other food or animal type has some type of inborn, genetic, or systematic impurity to it. Rather, in general, the status or the classification, therefore what it can and can't be used for, has to do with God's sovereign determination. As concerns the tabernacle and the entire holy precinct, Jehovah hands down inscrutable decisions about what and how ritual and worship before him is to occur, even including what's to be worn. It's really about that simple, because it's about obedience. It's about faithfulness to God and little else. The tabernacle's furnishings are to follow a specific plan according to what God shows Moses up on Mount Sinai. Verse 9 of chapter 25 says, "You are to make it according to everything I show you." The design of the tabernacle and the design of the furnishings. See, this was Jehovah talking to Moses during Moses' 40 days on top of Mount Sinai. Moses, at this point in chapter 25, has not yet come back down the mountains to the people. Now, many versions will translate this verse as, "Make it according to the pattern I show you." And that is certainly accurate. But the question is, of course, what pattern is God showing to Moses? I mean, has Jehovah rolled out a blueprint on a papyrus scroll and is showing Moses the finer details of an earthly tent? Instead of that, I think Jehovah is giving Moses a vision tour of God's heavenly dwelling place. The word tabernacle in Hebrew, mishkan, is just an expression meaning dwelling place. And the pattern Moses was told to follow to build the wilderness tabernacle was God's spiritual tabernacle, his actual throne room, his dwelling place in heaven. Moses' vision of the spiritual heavenly tabernacle was to be transformed into a working model, a copy to be developed in an entirely different realm, the physical earthly realm. So, is this just nice sounding allegory or theory on my part? Or is there more evidence that the heavenly was indeed the pattern for the earthly as being talked about here? Well, listen to Hebrews 8:5. But what they are serving is only a copy and a shadow of the heavenly original. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, God warned him, see to it that you make everything according to this pattern you're shown on the mountain. Hebrews 8 and 9 actually spends some time making comparisons between the heavenly and the earthly, using the tabernacle and the sacrificial system to make its point. But these same chapters also point out a principle that can get easily flip-flopped or bypassed in our minds, and it's this. The physical is by its very nature inferior to the spiritual. That is, what exists in the spirit world is far superior in its capabilities and perfection and purity than what's even possible in the physical world. For instance, the wilderness tabernacle, all of its furnishings and services, while real, while God ordained, are just copies, inferior copies of the real, original heavenly tabernacle, which of course existed before and then for a time simultaneously with the earthly tabernacle. I mean, the Bible will use the term shadows to compare the earthly to the heavenly, as in it was a shadow of things to come, when describing many of the elements of the tabernacle, the prophecies, the law. It's referring to the fact that compared to the spiritual original, the physical copy simply can't match up. It cannot provide the depth of reality that the real thing can. I mean, a great artist can paint a breathtaking picture of Mount Everest, as few others ever could, but it can never compare with the real Mount Everest. Because no matter how well it's drawn, the painting's just a shadow of the real thing. The physical world is very limiting because it's governed by the laws of physics and is contained within a universe of space and time. The spiritual operates outside of those limitations and laws. So, every element of the tabernacle, its rooms, its materials, its design, its furniture, perhaps even the rituals, everything were not as unique as we might have thought. Instead, it was only mimicking the heavenly original. And it looked forward towards the time when, through Messiah, humankind would be able to experience the limitless spiritual reality of its meaning instead of experiencing only the limited nature of its physical reality. This probably accounts for the basic design of the tabernacle, that is a structure consisting of 2 chambers, and then a third holy area that is a courtyard contained within a fence that surrounds the entire tabernacle center of operation. Now let's discuss some of the awesome connections and symbolism of a general nature about the tabernacle. It was laid out in the same way that the geographical area of Mount Sinai was laid out. Okay? That is, in Exodus, we learn that the mountain and the tabernacle were each divided into 3 zones of varying degrees of holiness. Okay? The entire mountain was deemed holy. All of it. God had ordered a stone fence erected at the base of the mountain as a boundary marker that separated the holy mountain from the valley floor below. The holy area was where only some could stand. And then this was separated from the not holy area where all the people could congregate. So the comparison is this. The entirety of Mount Sinai equated to the tabernacle tent. And the elaborate tent consisted of 2 connected rooms. A larger room that was the holy place, a smaller room that was the Holy of Holies. Now the summit of Mount Sinai, up there in the ominous cloud that burned like a raging fire, well, that was where the Spirit of God rested. Only one person was allowed to come into that area of the mountain, and only when summoned by Yahweh. That one person was Moses. The Holy of Holies in the wilderness tabernacle was just like the summit of the mountain. So at first, only Moses could enter. But later, only the high priest could enter, no one else, and even then, only 1 day a year. A specific day ordained by God, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The mountain slope, well, that was equivalent to the holy place. That larger front chamber of the tent sanctuary. The slope of Mount Sinai was where God called Moses plus the 70 elders, that's the people's representatives, plus Aaron and his 2 sons to come and have a traditional covenant meal before God. They had to come over that barrier line. Actually, they were summoned to come. Barrier line that separated the holy area of the mountain from all the others. The barrier line was that stone fence, which up to now, no one but Moses could cross. Now, however, because of the sacrifice on the altar that sealed the Mosaic covenant with the blood of that sacrificed animal, and which blood was ritually sprinkled on the people, therefore they were ceremonially atoned for, and their sins were covered, God could now allow these 74 people who represented all Israel, Moses, Aaron, Nadav, Abihu, and 70 elders, to come up the holy mountain. However, not to the summit, not to the Holy of Holies, but only on the mountain slope, the holy place, a zone of less holiness. Now in the wilderness tabernacle. See, the regular priests of Israel, they were allowed to cross the barrier of that front veil of the tent, the opening into that tabernacle tent, and come into the front chamber, the holy place, but they were allowed to go no further. But no common Israelite could cross that barrier. The valley floor side of the rock fence barrier was where the Hebrew people could congregate. It was the zone of humanity, but only for the set-apart people, only for people who are redeemed. It's also where God instructed Moses to build a stone altar on which to sacrifice to seal the Mosaic covenant. The valley floor was the equivalent to the outer courtyard of the tabernacle, the area immediately outside the tent sanctuary, but inside the perimeter fencing where the bronze altar of sacrifice was to be set and where the redeemed people of Israel could come to offer their sacrifices. So we see this sameness of pattern in every place that God dwells, a pattern that was carried out in different ways for every one of his earthly dwelling places, starting with the Garden of Eden, then Mount Sinai, then the wilderness tabernacle, and then its eventual replacement, the temple. I mean, how critical it is that we recognize that Jehovah is a God of patterns. His patterns never change, because how do you improve on divine perfection? It is with trepidation that any God worshiper ought to entertain the thought that somewhere along the path of redemption history, God suddenly changed. And he operated from that moment forward outside of his eternal patterns. I mean, even in a human being, should our behavior or our personality have a marked change, then it's the indicator that the person has undergone a fundamental change of character. See, this highlights how necessary it is that believers initiate our research for truth and for knowledge at the beginning of his written revelation, when God first began to reveal his patterns, so that we can understand each new stage of his progressive revelation as it arrives, and always within the patterns he had already established. If we don't do this, then we can mistakenly think that God advances his creation towards the ultimate redemption in ways that are always new and unique and totally different from how he used to do things. Perhaps one of the most wonderful visual examples of how this eternal pattern plays out is the wilderness tabernacle. Would you bow your heads before the Lord, please?
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.